Look, if someone gets infected, you've got between 10 and 20 seconds to kill them. It might be your brother or your sister or your oldest friend. It makes no difference. And just so you know where you stand, if it happens to you, I'll do it in a heartbeat.
Brutal.
But could it change? Question mark?
Could love change her?
Could love intervene between these two crazy kids in one wacky situation? Welcome to Your Pick, a film podcast. I'm Geneva.
And I'm Tatum.
We are two friends who love movies and love sharing them with each other. Each week, we take turns picking a film that is close to our hearts and talk about why it moves us, to tears, to laughter, and everything in between. We celebrate the craft of filmmaking, as well as the unique and personal ways we find meaning in the movies we watch. Well, Tatum, welcome back to another recording only a few days after the last time we recorded.
Yeah, we're going to start slowing down here soon. This has been a rapid pace for a long time.
It's been a wild ride these last couple weeks.
For the listener who has no idea what's happening in like our normal lives, we like to have a backlog just in case, things happen. And when I was working on The Bear earlier this year, we blew through our backlog. And so we're trying to rebuild it. But within the next week or so, I think we should be good to like stop recording multiple episodes so close together.
Yeah, we can actually start watching other things in between episodes.
My entire Letterboxd for the last like 2.5 months has just been like things for this podcast.
Yeah. Mine is like one movie for the podcast, one movie for me. One movie for the podcast. Yep.
Because the movies for the podcast are not for us.
Oh, right.
It's just for you, the listener.
It's for the people. Yes. Give the people what they want.
Yes.
Speaking of movies for me, Tatum.
We're in a mood today. I don't know what this mood is, but I like it.
We are. little slap happy today.
I guess.
I love it. I feel like it's just the right mood to start talking about zombies.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Tatum, have you seen anything recently?
I have, not too much, but I actually rewatched a family favorite from when I was growing up called Guess Who. It is a remake of the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, starring Sidney Poitier from, what was it, the 80s or 70s? I don't know.
60s. Late 60s.
Whatever it was. But it's a remake of that, except the roles are reversed. So the concept is it's an African-American woman who brings her white fiance home to meet her family. And craziness ensues. It's a movie that I genuinely really love. I wasn't sure if it would hold up because I probably haven't seen it in like 10 years. But I actually really enjoyed it. It's got a few aged jokes in terms of, some gay jokes that are in poor taste and a few things like that. But overall, I think it's still a very pleasant, enjoyable, funny comedy. I was surprised to see that there is a lot of like extreme hate for this movie on the internet and on Letterboxd. And my opinion is just that a lot of people that are writing these things are white people who like don't really understand how to engage with the subject matter. I don't know. But it's a very good movie and I had a good time with it. So it made me laugh, made me miss Bernie Mac. He's a legend. And I will forever be sad that he is no longer alive and, making us laugh with his humor. But yeah, so I watched Guess Who. And then I also, my life is super stressful as of late. So I've, as seen with Guess Who, which is something that's a lot lighter. And I haven't really been wanting to put in much energy to figure out like, okay, what mood am I in? What am I going to watch? And so I've actually been watching a lot of National Geographic.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Geneva, I actually don't know if you know this about me, but I'm obsessed with whales. They're like my favorite animal. I have like
I was not aware of this.
Yes, I have an extreme obsession with whales. And so the National Geographic, kind of network or whatever you call it. I don't know the name of this actual series or program, whatever you would call it, but it's like a focus on whales. So it's like each episode they dedicate an hour to talking about the culture of a particular type of whale. So The first one is orcas, the second one is humpbacks, and then the third one is belugas and narwhals, which narwhals are freaking gnarly. And yeah, next they're going to do like blue whales and sperm whales and all the whales. So
it's like Shark Week, but better.
But better. Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, whales are super, super impressive and really majestic animals. And yeah, so it's just been like a fun thing to put on at night before I go to bed, to just sit there and be like, oh, in awe of nature. This is amazing. So yeah, that's what I've been watching. I've been watching whales and Guess Who.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been a good time.
Have you ever seen, I feel like anyone says whales to me and my first association is always going to be Star Trek 4, aka Star Trek 4 Save the Whales.
Yep. It's on my list. It is on my list, but I have yet to watch it. But every single person who hears that I'm obsessed with whales is like, Tatum, you have to watch this movie.
Watch Star Trek.
So, yes.
Spock goes swimming with the whales. It's very sweet.
Are they real whales or are they CGI whales?
They have some real whales. I mean, this is the 80s. This is like the early to mid 80s. So
okay.
Yeah, they've got some real whales in there. He mind melds with one of them.
Cool. That's my kind of movie. I have a thing for like mind melding with animals. Like if I could do that with a whale, that'd be sick. Also, I will find a dragon and I will have a dragon someday. And we will combine our brains and become one and it'll be great.
This is starting to make a lot of sense to me because I'm feeling like a whale is the closest thing that you could possibly find in terms of scale to a dragon. So.
Yes. And they like fly, but underwater. And
yeah,
they're amazing.
All right. This all makes sense. I don't know why I was surprised.
Yeah. So anyway, fun facts about Tatum. She loves whales and she loves dragons, and dragons are real. Don't anyone tell me that they're not. Anyway.
All right. Well, in terms of myself, only one thing to report. I watched The Gold Diggers of 1935, so kind of continuing through Busby Berkeley's musicals of the 30s. It is really fascinating to compare with the musicals of the 1933 that I'd seen. So I mentioned, I think a few months ago on the podcast, that I'd watched Footlight Parade and then also Gold Diggers of 33 and then 42nd Street. Those are all movies that are very much pre-code. Like the code was coming in, but it was still pre-code. 1935 is very much post-code, and there's a very noticeable difference in terms of what they're able to get away with now versus later. But it's actually also really fascinating because 35 also feels like a more, I don't want to say a step forward because I don't want to make sort of qualitative value judgments, but it's kind of closer to what we think of as a more traditional movie musical in terms of having songs that are really directly integrated into the action, unlike those earlier musicals where it's very much story and then we stop and have a huge musical number, but it's within the context of the story. Like they're all show people putting on a musical number. Whereas this is more, you know, the guy and the girl go for a little walk in between rehearsals and then they just start singing to each other, that sort of thing. So anyway, yeah, it was all that aside, it was a pretty fun time. I enjoyed it. It wasn't the greatest musical of this era that I've ever seen, but it was a fun time.
It would have to take a lot to be the greatest musical of that era that you've seen. It would have to be your new favorite movie of all time.
Yeah, there are a lot of things there are a lot of contenders out there. I mean, Fred Astaire alone, you know, hard to top. Okay, so why don't we dive straight into 28 Days Later? All right, today in the show, we are discussing 28 Days Later, the 2002 action horror zombie movie directed by Danny Boyle, written by Alex Garland, and starring Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, Brendan Gleeson, and Christopher Eccleston. The movie centers on Jim, a young bike courier who wakes up from a coma to discover that all of Britain has been overtaken by a virus that turns people into mindless feral rage zombies. He teams up with Selena, a pragmatic chemist, Frank, a friendly cabbie, and Frank's teenage daughter Hannah to journey north in the hope of finding rescue. But as we discover in the third act of the film, perhaps the greatest danger of all isn't the zombies. Perhaps it's men?
Men.
Question mark, question mark. All right. I had a great time doing research for this movie. Well, it wasn't a whole lot of research because a lot of this I knew already because I'm a huge nerd.
You have paragraphs here, Geneva.
This movie is just a really fascinating to me intersection of a lot of different movements, a lot of people's careers kind of on the ascendancy, huge, massive cultural shifts taking place in the US and in Britain. So in the late 1990s, the quote, Cool Britannia movement brought a new generation of British artists, musicians, and filmmakers to the forefront of culture. One of these filmmakers was Danny Boyle, whose first two films, Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, became unexpected hits. Both of these films were cool, energetic, and experimental, while also being deeply cynical looks at British life in the late 20th century. Tatum, have you ever seen either Shallow Grave or Trainspotting?
I may have seen Trainspotting, but I have not seen Shallow Grave. I've seen a lot more of Boyle's more recent films.
His later work.
Yeah, I've seen a handful of his movies, but not as much his earlier stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's kind of interesting to contrast. I've not actually seen Trainspotting because I watched a couple sequences from it and was like, I don't know if I can handle this. But I have seen Shallow Grave, and that's a really, really cool little kind of dark thriller that is very well made. It's got Ewan McGregor, it's got Christopher Eccleston. Yeah, I would recommend that one. I think you would like it. 28 Days Later began as a screenplay by writer Alex Garland, who was inspired by his experience playing the video game Resident Evil, which featured zombies, and by the British post-apocalyptic story Day of the Triffids. Garland's idea was to make the zombies fast. Unlike traditional zombies, who were reanimated corpses barely capable of movement, these would be living people infected with a virus that simulated the effects of extreme, mindless rage. Garland brought the script to Boyle, who had previously directed an unsuccessful adaptation of Garland's novel The Beach. They later, after this movie, went on to collaborate a third time on Sunshine, which is a movie I love, and hopefully we will do one day on the podcast. The cast of the movie included two well-known character actors, Christopher Eccleston and Brendan Gleeson, but Boyle chose two relative unknowns for the leads. Naomi Harris was a child actor who'd done a little British TV. Cillian Murphy was a musician-turned-actor who'd done a few independent films, but both of them were very much stars on the rise. One of the most distinctive things about 28 Days Later is the grainy videotape quality of its cinematography. The director of photography was Anthony Dodd Mantle, who had worked with Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg as part of the Dogma 95 movement, which championed low-budget, handheld realism. Mantle is considered a pioneer of digital cinematography and eventually won an Oscar for his work on Danny Boyle's Slumdog Millionaire. Filming for 28 Days Later began in July of 2001 with the iconic opening sequence in which Cillian Murphy's character Jim wanders around a deserted London. To achieve this, the crew had to block off certain streets during the very early hours of the morning, dress the set, and capture the shot very quickly before allowing the car traffic to resume. Obviously, this could not have been done a few months later, because the film was still shooting in September when the 9/11 terrorist attacks shocked the world. The scene where Jim sees a wall of notes from people trying to find their relatives was shot before 9/11, but it gained new poignancy afterwards, when images like that were being shown on the news every day. And I think this was a big factor in why this movie became such an unexpected hit, is that it really kind of captured something about, what people were seeing on the news and the sort of disorientation and shock and fear that was being felt in culture at the time. And this movie was sort of poised in the center, where it was kind of the last movie that could ever have been made of this kind, using these kinds of images. Finding the ending of the movie proved very difficult. When the production nearly ran out of money, and they shot and tested a fairly bleak ending in which Jim dies of the gunshot wound and Selena and Hannah set out together into kind of just, an uncertain future. However, this played horribly with audiences when they tested it. The studio finally agreed to fund a more positive ending in which Jim lives and he, Selena, and Hannah have the hope of being rescued. You can actually see the original ending. It's on YouTube and on DVDs for this film if you are able to get your hands on the DVD. So kind of interesting to think about what this film the turn that this film could have taken. All right, so 28 days later. So my personal experience with this movie, I first saw it a couple years ago when I was doing a deep dive on Cillian Murphy's career and seeing some of his earlier work. And like I've said before in the podcast, I'm not a big horror person, but I'm trying to become more educated about horror and kind of explore what are the things that I like and don't like about it. And I really like this movie. I really like the post-apocalyptic genre in general. And this idea of the world, all these people being suddenly disappeared from the world and you having to start out on your own and sort of start from scratch, basically, and build a new life for yourself while navigating dangers. I just find that really interesting. I like the emotional core of this movie, the characters as they have this sort of back and forth debate about, is it just survival enough, or do you need to have something worth living for? And if so, what is that thing? And how do you keep hope when hope seems to be lost? But also this movie I really like how this movie balances the optimism and the pessimism about human nature, because I think that echoes something in myself. I like the fact that it ends positively, but I also like the fact that there is a real dark side to this movie, especially when it comes to the third act and what that says about humanity. So, yeah, I love this movie a lot. Excited to talk about it. Tatum, do you have a history with this movie, and what were your thoughts on this rewatch?
So I also saw this movie for the first time a few years ago. The first time I saw this movie, I did not like it very much. And the environment in which I watched it the first time was I was living in Spain. It was the hottest month of the year. There was no air conditioning. We couldn't go outside because it was so hot. And so the only thing to do was stay inside, close the windows, close the shades, and try and lay as still as possible. And so that was literally the scenario in which I watched this movie. I took a freezing cold shower and just like laid on a bed in the dark and hoped I wouldn't die of just heat. And so, yeah, I was not particularly impressed with this movie the first time I watched it. So going into it this time, I was kind of like, okay, maybe it was just the way in which I watched it last time. Let's see what happens this time around. I still don't like this movie very much. I think it kind of plays into that scenario that I think we've talked about on this podcast before, where it's like, I think if I had seen this in its time, in the year that it came out, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. But for me, while I'm watching this, I'm like, I have seen this scenario a million times. I've seen World War Z. I've seen I Am Legend. I've seen Terminator. I've seen The Last of Us. I've seen, it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. This concept of post-apocalypse, someone is in a scenario where they're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? What's happening? I don't know. Let's meet people. And then they meet people, and then they learn about the threat, and then they form friends. And then there's like, oh, there's hope if we get to this place, and we learn. And then they get there, and it's like, oh, guess what? They're either cannibals or they're murderers, or it's not safe because it burns down, and then they have to move somewhere else. It's just, it's for me, I like the opening a lot. I like the opening sequence with the animal rights activists and the chimpanzees and the monkeys. And when Cillian Murphy's character initially wakes up and goes walking through like the empty London, I love all of that. And then after that, I'm kind of just, I'm not impressed with not that I'm not impressed, because I don't need movies to impress me, but the story just doesn't connect with me because it doesn't feel original, because I've seen so many things that have come after this. But this even came after things like the Terminator, and Terminator has similar concepts too, where it's like, oh, we have to find Skynet, and they'll, yeah, I don't know. I'm interested to see how we talk about this, because I do feel like there is potential for me to be swayed on certain things, and pushed more in the direction of liking this movie a bit more. But overall, it's just a movie where I'm pretty lukewarm on it until it gets to the end. And then the end, I'm like, okay, this is really just like cheesy and predictable. And I don't feel like I need to watch this to the end because I already know everything that's going to happen. So yeah, anyway, I know that this movie is beloved by many. So I recognize that like I am in the minority with this, but at the same time, I'm not going to lie and pretend that I like this movie more than I do, because that's not why we do this podcast. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, all I can say is appreciate your thoughts. You're wrong, but
that's okay.
Just kidding.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I'm curious to hear as well before we go any further, because Alex Garland is I'm a huge fan of his. I've been following his work for years. What is do you have any sort of like history with his work independent of the rest of the movie?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of his stuff. I've seen, I mean, he hasn't always directed. I think he's only directed a few things, but as far as writing, I mean, I've seen a lot of his stuff. I've seen Ex Machina. I love Annihilation. I've seen Never Let Me Go. I did not watch Men because of personal reasons about just the general topic of the subject matter of that movie. I watched his television show Devs. I thought it started out really, really strong. I thought it kind of teetered out, or what's the phrase I'm looking for? Like it
petered out?
Yeah, it kind of petered out towards the end for me in terms of like interest. We've talked about this before very briefly, but I've seen Sunshine. I don't like Sunshine. So I'm very mixed with him. Some of his stuff I really, really like a lot. And then other things kind of miss the mark for me, which makes me think it has more so to do with like taste. Some of his stuff is my taste and some of it isn't, as opposed to like, this is good and this is bad. But yeah, I'm pretty familiar with Alex Garland's kind of like filmography.
Gotcha. You've not seen Dread, right?
No, I have not.
That's a movie I'd kind of love to do on the podcast. I really love Dread. Anyway, okay, yeah, I was just curious. I know you'd seen Sunshine and you weren't crazy about it, but I couldn't remember how many of his other things you'd seen.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of his things, and I've also seen quite a few of Danny Boyle's movies. So, and Danny Boyle is another thing where, like, looking at his filmography, there's some things that I really like and then other things that don't work for me at all. So
yeah, I've mostly seen early Danny Boyle. I haven't seen many post Slumdog Millionaire projects. I've seen Yesterday, which is not very good.
Great concept, but poor execution.
Yeah. It's kind of unfortunate. It is a really great concept. Yeah, okay. So why don't we start going through the plot of this movie? So as you mentioned, it opens with basically the whole apocalypse is the fault of PETA, which it's kind of funny. So there are these activists who break into a Cambridge laboratory and they discover something that is genuinely really horrifying, which is this monkey is strapped down and forced to watch all of these videos of just real life horrific events throughout the world. And that's how the movie opens, is showing all these real life mobs and fire and police violence and people fighting in the streets and, you know, just the worst parts of humanity. And it's all just being fed into this poor innocent monkey's eyes, basically. But the activists break in. They're trying to free the animals that are being tested on, and the scientist is like, please do not do this. These animals are infected. You do not know what you're doing. But they do it, and the monkey gets free and bites one of the activists, and she turns into a zombie, and basically it's all over from there.
I will say, like I said before, this opening sequence, particularly with the monkeys and the animal rights activists, it's my favorite part of the whole film. I think it's a great way to just like establish the stakes and build tension and really get you invested right off the bat. So I really like it a lot. And so this is very nitpicky, but it was just something that I was thinking about. I was like, that doctor could have done a better job. He's like, they're infected with what? Rage. Like, you
I know, I had the same thought, like, oh, that's helpful.
Like, you could have said, oh no, they're infected with a virus that will turn you into a like killing machine in 10 seconds and we can't stop it and it'll destroy human, like, instead of rage. Like, okay,
rage is not a disease. I'm sorry.
Yeah, like if someone tells me, like if I walk into a scenario as an animal rights activist and I'm seeing animals being abused, and someone tells me, who probably is a little bit crazy already because they're acting this way towards these animals, if they tell me the animals are infected with rage, I'm not going to listen to you. Be like, okay, they're probably mad at you for locking them up. Like, of course they're infected with rage. So it's the doctor's fault, in my opinion.
Yes. It's all the doctor's fault. If only he'd had a better story prepared.
Well, I'm not going to go into just made me think of Bran, Game of Thrones. Good story.
Oh my gosh. Who has the best story? All right.
Well, I'm glad that you and I both had that same thought. Because I was like, come on, man. Come on.
Come on, man. Rage, like, you got to work on that. All right. So we get an opening title that says 28 Days Later. And then we meet Jim, and he's lying on a hospital bed. He's got a bunch of IVs in him. He is otherwise completely naked. He's been locked into this hospital room with this key slipped under the door. And my personal trauma happens, which is people just waking up in a hospital bed and immediately ripping all the IVs out of their arm, which is just, I hate it when that happens. It's the worst cliche ever. Although he at least does bandage his arm, so they do acknowledge that that would be extremely painful. But yeah, so Jim he was a bike courier, he says later. He's just this young guy, early 20s. He looks extremely skeletal. His head is half shaved because he has this giant scar on the half of the side of his head. And he wakes up and there is no one around him. And he's wandering. He goes through the hospital. He finds some Pepsi to drink, which is like probably the only calories that he's had in weeks. He immediately finds a plastic bag and just starts gathering up more Pepsi, which I'm like, oh, my man is very resourceful. Good for him.
Wonder what type of arrangement they had with Pepsi in order to have that be their drink. That's
Pepsi, and there was some other soda that they list later in the movie. I can't remember the name, and I'd never heard of it before. And he's like, "Do you have any Tang or something?"
That's the prop buyer in me. Like, what's the deal as far as
the deal?
Which types of Pepsis can we show, and how many of them, and blah 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 blah.
Make sure that when he drinks the Pepsi, the label is turned toward the audience.
Yep, it's never just Pepsi. There's always a story behind how much Pepsi, what lighting, how do we see it, how is it being used, and what context are we seeing the Pepsi?
But yeah, this whole sequence. So this is, I'm not going to say it's my favorite in the sequence in the movie because I have several favorite sequences in the movie. But this is it's an iconic sequence for a reason. It is so beautifully shot. Seems a weird phrase to say, considering that the cinematography in this movie is kind of actively ugly, like intentionally ugly. But the way these shots are framed with just pulling back and showing him in one of the most crowded cities in the world, in some of the most crowded areas of the most crowded city in the world, all just completely deserted. There's just papers and debris scattered everywhere. And he just keeps yelling, "Hello, hello, hello." And he's like, he has no idea what's going on. And there's this wall with all of the photographs and the letters from people trying to contact their relatives, which, like, I just cannot imagine how disorienting and terrifying it would be to wake up, everyone is gone, and all the only sign of human life is everyone trying to reach out to the people they love before something terrible happens to them. But yeah, thoughts on this sequence, because oh man, this is like a sequence that I will just randomly watch on YouTube sometimes. The music is also great. It's this, I think it's called Godspeed Godspeed Good Emperor or something like that. I forget the name, but it's this beautiful song that's just kind of pulsing and poignant, and it just suits the mood of the scene so well.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I wanted to say that I think that I really appreciate when movies have good titles. And I feel like the title to this movie is just really clever. It's a really, really great title. Just this concept of we see kind of the present day or the past, however you want to look at it. And then all of a sudden we're jumping to the 28 days later, and kind of the rest of the movie is about the aftermath of what we had seen 28 days before. I just think it's a really, really great film title. So I just wanted to say that. As far as this whole sequence, I mean, yeah, I think it's really captivating and it's really interesting. I will say, I do think it's maybe a little bit unrealistic how chill he is for how long. Like, I understand that he's probably confused and maybe in shock a little bit, but he's walking around for at least an hour, if not longer. And the fact that the whole time he's just like, oh, hello. Like, I feel like someone would have a breakdown. Someone would have a breakdown at some point within that time period. But that's, again, a nitpick. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an interestingly shot sequence. I really like how I like the sequence when he gets to the church and the first time we actually see people. And at first we're like, oh, people. Okay. And then, oh, wait, they're all dead. And then, wait, oh, no.
Well,
they're not.
It is so incredibly horrifying because, I mean, first of all, you have this incredible sequence of him going into the church and slowly going up the stairs, and there's just this gradual reveal that someone has painted on the walls. The end is extremely fucking nigh, which is, I feel like is exactly what would happen in that situation. But he opens the church and it's just, this entire sanctuary is just strewn with bodies, like just piled high. And it really looks like something you'd see in some sort of news broadcast of the aftermath of a massacre or a natural disaster. And there's this little, like you can hear the flies buzzing around, and he looks like he's about to cry. And then he says hello, and all of a sudden two people shoot up. But the look on their eyes, like these are the zombies. And it's just, this is the first indication that there are zombies in this film. But it's just, oh my goodness, the timing of it, the way he says hello, and then boom, all of a sudden it's like these whip pans over to these two like creepy looking figures that suddenly shoot up and start staring at him. It's so good. And then the priest comes out, and the priest is a zombie, but Jim doesn't know that, but he knows something's wrong, and he's like trying to get away, and then he hits him, and then he's like, I'm sorry, which is just such a like, oh man, the Irish Catholic guilt. Yeah, it's such a good sequence, like that slow dawning, like, you've never experienced this before. You don't know how to process what's happening. And so you're apologizing to the zombie even as the zombie is trying to murder you.
Yeah, I just like the establishing of the zombies, because obviously we see them in that first sequence when that first person is transformed and we see the eyes and, but I don't know. I just think it does a good job of establishing kind of the threat that they pose just through like how quickly they move and how much they can just hear you and hear where you are. And yeah, I just think it's a really cool, it's a really well shot sequence that establishes just how big this threat actually is. And I like that it takes place in a church. I think that's really interesting. And I think that also is something that's very realistic. I think in a time of something like this, a lot of people probably would go to some sort of house of faith, whatever type of house of faith it is, and kind of just sit there and wait and hope that, some sort of God will reveal themselves. And then before you know it, they're all dead. And then they're all zombies.
Priest is trying to murder you.
Yeah.
Which I'm very curious if the priest had because he seemed to have been barricaded into the office at the end, and then he breaks out just as Jim is coming in. And, you just picture like the last moments of the priest knowing he's going to turn into a zombie and trying to barricade himself into the office and not quite doing a good enough job. But yeah. I find the theme too, and this is something that has always fascinated me about Sunshine as well, but the push and pull between Alex Garland as an atheist and Danny Boyle as kind of an agnostic, but someone who's had sort of flirted with the idea of religion in the past is really fascinating to me, how those sorts of things come out in their collaborations. So Jim is now being chased by the zombies, and the zombies are fast, and they're just like people, who are really fast and strong and are running. But he's rescued by these two survivors named Mark and Selena, and they tell him, they basically break it to him that the country has collapsed. There's no government, there's no news, there's no word on whether this is happening everywhere or just in Britain. But everyone is dead. Our families are dead. Your family is going to be dead. And Jim, struggles to accept this. And he's like, well, I want to go and find my parents. Like, I need to know if they're dead or not, which is an understandable, although, not very smart, but a very human impulse. Thoughts on Mark and Selena and our first introduction to them?
Well, I'm trying to picture in my brain what that introduction actually is.
So they're throwing Molotov cocktails. They blow up this gas station. It's this really impressive explosion. And then they take him into like a convenience store or something. And Mark like shoots a joke at him. And Jim is just like, what? And Mark is like, he's humorless. And I'm like, Mark, calm down.
Yeah. I mean, I liked Mark. I did forget that he dies in this movie. So that, or at least that he died that quickly and in the way that he did. But I think it definitely establishes them from the beginning of being, likable people that know how to survive and will do what it takes. But also I like this combination of Selena being a little bit more of like, a little bit more cautious and closed off, and then Mark seemingly being more open and welcoming. I thought that it makes sense to me that the two of them are a team and why they've kind of been together. I mean, I guess we don't know how long they've been together, but I don't know. I like their dynamic.
Yeah, you could easily imagine them having a whole movie to themselves prior to them meeting Jim and the events of this movie. Because there's clearly a whole story that happened for each of them to be in this situation. They're alone. They don't seem to have known each other before all this happened. They just kind of met up and joined forces and have been keeping each other alive for this long, which does not seem to be very long at all. I mean, 28 days is really not that much time.
No.
Which is crazy, like considering how much devastation that the world is in right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we don't know if it's the whole world, though. That's true. That's the question, which I think, I should say. Which in my opinion is a question that should have remained unanswered. But that last scene is like, oh wait, no, other people are okay. I'm like, okay, cool. Didn't want that question to be answered, but great.
I did.
But that's just the different way that you and I approach movies.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, I'm curious. Have you seen the movie I Am Legend?
I have not. No. I
feel like you would hate I Am Legend because it is very much so a ripoff of this movie. In lots of ways. I would argue it's a little bit better, but that's my own opinion. How can you say it's better if it's copying something else?
Sure.
We could have that debate all day long.
Well, isn't the whole point of I Am Legend that Will Smith is the only one left? It's just him and maybe a dog versus the zombies?
Well, he meets other people, so...
Oh, he does?
Yes. And the reason I brought this up is because... not to compare them, because there's a lot of common themes between apocalypse movies just across the board.
I mean, your zombie movies are going to generally be dealing with similar themes and tropes and ideas.
Yeah, but even just like apocalypse movies in general. But this scene with Selena and Mark made me think of this one sequence in I Am Legend where, spoiler alert, Will Smith's character meets other people. And they're kind of like, what's going on? What is this world? And he is telling them, like, and there's this line that Will Smith delivers that is so well acted, in my opinion. But he looks at her and he goes, every single person that you and I have ever known is dead. And he's like really trying to like get it into her head. Like, everyone is dead. There is no hope. Like, everyone is dead. You need to understand. And this sequence with Selena and Mark and Jim kind of reminded me of that, because we have both of them on this side of trying to teach Jim, like, this is the reality of the situation. But Selena's a lot more like harsh about it, whereas Mark is more gentle. But anyway, yeah, it made me think of that scene from I Am Legend, because that's one of the most, one of the more memorable scenes of I Am Legend, because Will Smith's acting is just so good in that sequence. But yeah.
I mean, one of the things I love about this movie is the transformation of the characters. And obviously Jim, as the central character, has the most transformation, where he starts out as an innocent. He's a young guy. He's still living with his parents. We don't know exactly how old, but might be a little bit of arrested development going on there. But him being thrust into this unbelievably difficult situation and having to, being a blast of wind could knock this guy over. Like, he's not a physically intimidating person. And so having to first rely on the good graces of the people around him, and then later, as he does gain confidence and knowledge in this world, using that then to protect the people around him, is just a transformation that I find really compelling. With Mark, Selena says later that Mark had ideas and plans, and that Selena is different because she doesn't. And I do find that dynamic really interesting, in the sense of, Jim sort of takes over the Mark role after Mark has been killed. Mark is the one who's thinking about the long term and thinking about the future, and then Jim kind of slides into that role. But Mark also, because he's only there for such a short time, but he does tell this really harrowing story about what happened to his own family, which is that they went to some sort of port to try and see if they could buy or barter their way out of Britain while there was still some sort of organized evacuation going on. And this huge crowd had gathered, and there were zombies in the crowd. There was a surge, and he managed to find a high point to protect himself. But he lost contact with all of his family except his father. And the way he describes looking at his father's face and basically not being able to tell if he was infected or not, like the twisted, look of whatever that was, rage, fear, horror, like, it's just that idea that it's so much better to have the people you love just snuffed out, as opposed to having to witness that and having to live with that memory for the rest of your life, is just a really evocative, horrifying thought to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Selena and Mark go with Jim to Jim's home. It's undisturbed, so the zombies have not got it, but his parents are dead. And what we find out is that his parents, after knowing that he is in a coma and that the entire world is breaking down, they made the decision to lie down in bed and end their own lives together. And they wrote a note for Jim. And it's really devastating. He's like this little boy who's suddenly come home and found out that, his home is gone, his parents are gone, and he, there's a sequence where as they're all kind of trying to get some rest, he's like going around the house with a candle and looking at all these memories and remembering his parents as they used to be. But of course, he woke up from a coma 24 hours ago. He doesn't know the rules yet, and he brings on the zombies. And so there's a zombie attack. They break through the window. Mark and Selena manage to fight them off, but Mark gets cut, and Selena does not hesitate. She brutally just hacks Mark to bits.
I thought she was just going to cut his arm off, because it looked like the first couple swings, the way that it was shot, she was just cutting his arm. And I was like, oh, she's going to cut the arm off to get rid of the infection, whatever. Because again, I forgot that Mark died. And I was like, oh no, she's straight up just slashing him to pieces. Like, okay. That's great.
Yeah, she's not joking around. We don't really get a sense of whether that would work. But the infection spreads so quickly, I have to assume that she's 10
seconds. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to mention, I did really like that sequence with Jim in the kitchen, and he's having that memory, and it's like it's almost like he's watching a home video, but he's also participating in it at the same time. I just thought that was a really interesting idea, and the way that it was shot and I guess interpreted. I just thought it was really well done. I liked that a lot.
Yeah, I agree. It's very it's color. It's still grainy, but it's colored and lit in a very different way than the events of the rest of the movie. So you can tell you're watching a flashback. Yeah, it's very well done. So Jim and Selena are now a team, and they head out, and there's a crucial conversation between the two of them where Jim asks Selena how she knew that Mark had actually been infected, because basically there was blood absolutely everywhere. Like, it's a miracle that Jim and Selena are not covered in glass shards and zombie blood. But she says she didn't know, but Mark knew, and that she could tell from his face. And she says, like, once someone gets infected, you have 10 seconds to kill them, and I'm not going to hesitate. All I want to do is, I'm not like Mark. I don't have plans for the future. All I want to do is stay alive. They come across this apartment building that has these Christmas lights on, which is very strange because, not much electricity still working. So they go to investigate, and they get into this tower block where zombies are chasing them up the stairs, and Jim is like crashing because all he's had to eat for like 28 days is just a boatload of sugar. But this guy in riot gear shows up, and he lets him into this apartment, and it turns out that it's Brendan Gleeson, who, favorite actor of mine. I'm always delighted to see him on screen. And he's Frank. He's got this teenage daughter, Hannah. His wife, we're not sure what happened, but it seems like she may have been killed by zombies. But they welcome Jim and Selena in, and they it's like a sort of a temporary safe place for them to all be for a little bit of time. Try and be like some semblance of normalcy. Any thoughts on the introduction of Hannah and Frank?
Well, I just wanted to mention a little bit before that moment, when Selena and Jim are kind of walking down the street after Mark has died. Selena, she's kind of going through this monologue, like you mentioned, where she's talking about, I won't hesitate. You have 10 seconds, blah, blah, blah. And then I think somewhere in the midst of that, she says something like, what do you, like, I don't know if you're expecting
expecting us to find a cure, for us to just fall in love, and like none of that's gonna happen. All we're doing is staying alive, something like that.
Yeah. So I just really liked that was something that she said. I think it's super I don't know. I think for me as an audience member, I really appreciated a character saying that, because I feel like whenever I go into an apocalyptic movie like this, I'm like, okay, they're going to try and find a cure. Someone's going to fall in love, blah, 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 which they end up doing both of those things in this movie. But
well, they don't find a cure,
but they go looking for a cure.
They do go looking.
So yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting that they kind of instilled that in one of the characters within this story, and then they end up doing it anyway. But I liked that she had that perspective at first of like, I'm just going to survive. All of these other things I don't care about because they don't exist. I'm not going to get my hopes up. Like, I'm just surviving. And so I thought that was just an interesting concept to have a character straight up say that. But yeah, as far as meeting Frank and Hannah, I'm thinking that you'll agree with me. If not, let's talk about it. I think Hannah is a terrible actress.
Oh, she's awful. Absolutely awful.
She ruins.
I apologize to the actress who was a teenager at the time. I feel bad making fun of child and teenage actors, but yeah, she's really bad.
I every single time she said anything, I was like, you have any sort of sense that I was in the world of this movie has immediately been removed, because you sound like her acting is just awful. So I wish that they'd found a better actor for her. I think that there's lots of teenage actors that know how to act and do it well. I don't know if it was a budget thing or if they had some sort of personal relationship with this person and that's why they brought them on the project. I don't know, but I think she brings down the movie a lot. It would be one thing if she was a minor character And granted, she is more minor than Jim and Selena, but she's still a main character. And so yeah, I don't like this actress at all. So anyway, I think that's like my main takeaway from meeting them. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this performance is just so bad.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. I mean, it doesn't bring down the movie too much for me. I do wish they had a better actress in that role, but since I like everything that goes on around her and I like the function that she plays within the movie, I don't know. I can overlook it, I think, a lot a lot more easily than you can.
I think that Frank too, as a character, I think that he shows this really cool and interesting balance of, you know, he's a father, and because of that, he has to he's almost forced to have some sense of optimism for his life because he has a child that he wants them to have a future. And so I think in a lot of this movie, we kind of see him as this cheerful kind of guy. But then every once in a while, we get these moments where he really shows that actually he's struggling with this too. And he's scared and he is, you know, on the brink of hopelessness as well. But he has to keep it together for his child. And so I feel like we see that even just this introduction of him, because he starts out as this guy who's like, he's defending them, he's fighting for them. And then he tells his daughter, let them in. He's so kind and offering them food. And then the next morning, he's basically yelling at them like, this is the only hope that we have. Like, this radio broadcast might not be real. I don't care. We have to go. And so, yeah, I think he's honestly, out of all of them, I think he's the most interesting character to me because he seems to have a lot more layers than the other people that are around him. So yeah, I think it's a good introduction to him.
Yeah, you really wonder what would have happened to him if he didn't have this daughter to protect and to fight for and to keep living for. You know, so much of his plans and the way that he makes decisions is based around, I just have to keep my daughter alive. I have to protect her. I have to keep her safe. I have to keep her fed. I have to, do everything that I can to ensure that she has a future. And that's, I think, the thing that is able to motivate him. And then later in the movie, when it seems like, and as we find out is in fact true, that the hope that he's been basing all of his decisions on is a false hope, he just kind of falls apart a little bit, very understandably. But yeah, so they're all hanging out in the apartment. Selena, like, she kind of clocks that, like, Hannah and Frank, they're desperate. They need us more than we need them. And again, you know, she's taking this very pragmatic view of the situation. And there's this really nice little exchange where Jim is like, you know, he's kind of ribbing her about like, oh yeah, if they slowed you down, she'd leave them behind. And she's like, yes, I would leave them behind if they slowed me down.
You're joking, but I'm not joking.
Yeah, exactly. Like, come on. But yeah, there's this really nice little exchange where Jim is like, listen, I know you think that I don't get it, but I do get it. I just disagree, basically. Like, I understand the situation we're in, and yet I choose to have hope. And he says, listen, I'd be dead without you, and so thank you. And Selena says, sure. And Jim's like, no, what I mean is thank you. And Selena says, what I mean is sure.
Yep.
And it's just such a good encapsulation of kind of where their characters are at this moment.
Yeah, I like this dynamic of Selena having this perspective that they need us more than we need them. And then obviously the tables get turned when Hannah the next day is like, we both need each other. Like, you need us like, just as much as we need you. And that's why you guys are still here. That's why we're all going on this journey together. And anyone who's saying anything different is lying to themselves. And I like how that's kind of flipped, because I think Selena is someone who, in my opinion, she seems so much so convinced in everything that she says that she is right and that no one can change her mind. And Hannah proves her wrong, or not proves her wrong, but like changes her mind in that moment of like, no, we all need each other. And so let's stop pretending that that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, Hannah points out, I think very smartly, that, you know, what is Selena's plan otherwise is just to stay in the city. The cities are really the most dangerous place to be right now. There's a million places for things to be hiding out. It would be much safer to move out of the city and to move into a more isolated area why not move and go after this thing that Frank wants them to go after, which is, so basically they have discovered this radio broadcast that's playing on a loop, and it claims that the answer to infection is somewhere northeast of Manchester. There's other survivors, there's soldiers who are armed, safety is out there basically. So Frank wants to go for it. Selena's very resistant, but she allows herself to be persuaded because it is, like you said, and like Hannah points out, they all really need each other. These people you're not going to survive very long if you're on your own. It is more helpful to be with other people.
I had one of those radios, by the way.
Oh, really?
The little ones that you can wind up. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't remember why or when, but I definitely had one, or my parents, I guess, had one when I was little.
Be very useful if you ever find yourself in a post-apocalyptic scenario.
I was thinking, watching this movie, I was like, I mean, I'm not a doomsday prepper, but I also feel like there's some practical things that I should have in my home for, like, if something happens and, like, the power goes out in the entire city for a long period of time or whatever. I'm like, I should probably get some more practical radios and flashlights and things like that. That would probably be a smart thing to do.
Yeah. Do you ever do this? I will do this sometimes as an exercise. I used to do it more when I was younger, but I would just lie in bed sometimes, and when I couldn't sleep, I would think about, all right, if like all of a sudden the apocalypse happened and I had to get out of this house right now, and I could just grab a backpack and fill it with stuff, what would I fill it with? And then just
you'd think about that to put yourself to sleep?
Yeah, sure.
Wow.
Making lists.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, like what are the practical items, but how would you balance it against the sentimental items that you want to take with you? What are the clothes you'd want to bring?
I do have a sword. I would take my sword with me.
Sword could be helpful.
Sword would definitely be helpful in any scenario.
Is it a heavy sword?
No, but it's better than a kitchen knife because I could sharpen it and
all right,
use it over and over.
Well, you're on my post-apocalyptic team now.
Oh, well, there you go.
Great.
I could last at least a day.
Yeah.
I could last at least a day, I feel like. I'd last more than a few hours.
You would last longer than me. I'm telling you that right now.
Maybe. I don't know. Let's test the theory.
You're definitely more athletic than me. All right. So speaking of surviving in a post-apocalyptic scenario. So turns out Frank is actually a cabbie, and he has this like cab that is still in working order and has gas and everything. So they can drive. They're trying to drive out of the city. Frank decides to take them through this underground tunnel, which I'm a little confused about the writing in this scene because Jim is the only one who's like, this is obviously a really shitty idea. How is everyone else not on his side? How is Jim the only one who's extremely sensible? Because obviously this is a really terrible idea.
They need more adventure and excitement in their lives. They're just thrill seekers.
I guess they say it's the most... you know what it is? I'm just realizing this now. Because they say it's the most direct way out of the city, and that's why Frank chooses it. I think Frank chooses it because he has spent, like, collectively 10 years of his life being caught in traffic in this tunnel, and now he has the opportunity to just drive over the cars, and he's like, I'm not passing that up.
I'm gonna do it. Yep. And it works, kind of.
It kind of works, yeah. They drive over the cars, which I have no idea how that's supposed to work. They do get a flat tire, and so Hannah has to change it in record time. Great job, Hannah. Jim is like so snarky. He's like, oh, world's worst place to get a flat, huh? It's like, Jim, not helpful. But after this is one of my favorite scenes in this movie, which is the grocery shopping scene, which is a scene that I will just randomly think about because who doesn't want to go into a grocery store where there's no one there and money doesn't mean anything, so you can take literally anything and everything you could ever want. And it's just so delightful because it's just like in the midst, it's this little oasis of the characters being really playful with each other and having fun in the midst of this really rotten situation where everything has been bleak. And, Frank and Hannah are like playing around with the shopping carts, and Frank is like instructing Jim on like, oh, no, don't choose that scotch, choose this scotch. It's like very fatherly. He like looks at the apples, which are like the only green thing that's left in the produce section. He's like, irradiated. Anyway, I love it so much. So yeah, they all leave the store. Frank leaves his credit card behind, which is great. And yeah, I love that sequence.
One of my friends shared this video meme the other day, and it was a video. I don't know who made this video, but it's amazing. I guess it wasn't a meme then. It was just a video that they shared. But in the video, it's this guy. He goes, yeah, I don't like to brag, or I don't typically brag about the expensive trips that I take, but I just came back from the grocery store. And then it just replays again. Like, I don't like to brag. I don't normally brag about the expensive trips I take, but I just got back from the grocery store.
That is amazing.
RIP. But yeah, so as far as this sequence goes, I just want to say this is where I start to get with the movie, and I'm like, oh, it starts to fall apart for me, because there's just certain things about it that I'm like, I see little bits and pieces of how this could be good, but there's something that happens that takes it to Cheese Town for me, and I can't get over it. And so for this scene of them in the grocery store, I like the idea of them kind of, you know, having this light, carefree moment after this beginning of the movie, and it's really tense, and then it's nice to have a little bit of a reprieve, you know, before we go back into the depths of man is evil, not zombies, or they're both evil, whatever. But I like the idea of them having this moment that's carefree, and I liked the humor of him kind of placing his card on the counter as they leave. But my gosh, the score during this scene is absolutely the most obnoxious.
Wait, what's wrong with the score?
It's obnoxious. Oh my, have you listened to it? I was watching this scene. I'm like, oh my gosh, I hate this so much. Like, this music is so annoying and so repetitive and so, like, it just is silly. It sounds like it's a joke. I'm like, is this a joke? Like, I know this scene is supposed to be funny, but this is so obviously like on the nose. Ha ha ha, this scene's supposed to be funny and light. And I was like, I would have liked this scene otherwise, but because the music plays throughout the whole thing and I hate it so much, I was like, I don't think I can watch this sequence again because the music is the worst.
Wow. Cannot say
I
that
couldn't stand it. I was like, I can't take this.
I cannot say that I had that reaction to the music, but all right.
Man, it was like, I couldn't get over it. But anyway, it's okay. It could be just a me thing. I don't know. But I'm like, I don't know who composed the music for this sequence, but good golly, it's a bit much.
Frank leaving his credit card behind.
I liked that, but the music was too much.
All right. So they stop at a gas station, and we have this really interesting scene where my interpretation of this is that Jim is basically kind of deciding that it's about time for him to take some sort of control over his own sort of role in this group. And he wants to kind of investigate and have some sort of adventure that he can call his own. So he decides to go into while they're waiting outside to fuel, Jim decides to go into this nearby fast food station.
To get them hamburgers.
To get the, yes, he says cheeseburgers.
As if there's fresh cheeseburgers a month
I mean,
later.
That's very clearly a joke. And Selena's like, you better stay close. And he's like, ugh, it's like going on a vacation with your fucking aunt, which is very funny. But yeah, he goes in, and I think very much knowing what he's going to find, which is a bunch of corpses, horrifyingly, including an infant lying on the floor.
I didn't need to see that. I'm sorry. I know that exists. I don't need to see it. That's just my own personal opinion, but
very train spotting, honestly. So he goes in there, he kind of looks around. He gets this look on his face like he's doing something very intentionally, and he goes, hello? And then a zombie jumps out to attack him, and so he like knocks it down, but he sees the zombie is just a child. It's just a little boy. And they, in between all the growling and the screaming from the zombie, they meld in this, I hate you. Did you catch that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did.
So Jim kills it. You know, he doesn't really have a choice. And then he walks outside, and the others are like, what happened in there? And he says nothing.
They all know something happened in there.
So the group, they drive to these ruins in the middle of the country where they're very isolated apart from people. They feel kind of safe. They have a little picnic. Jim and Selena have this conversation where Selena's like, you know, we're never going to experience an original like piece of art again. You know, that we're never going to read a book that's never been made before. We're never going to see a film that's never been made before, a piece of painting or anything like that. Which I think is, I mean, you know, probably not true if there was our other survivors. Like someone's gonna rebuild, start doing art again. But
someone's out there writing right now because it's their only way to process what's going on.
Exactly. There's gonna be so much art about what happened. But it is still a little kind of a disconcerting way of thinking. But Jim's like, yeah, no, that's what you were thinking. I was not thinking about that at all. And Selena's like, yeah, I kind of realized that I was wrong because seeing Frank and Hannah together shows that there actually is more than just staying alive. There is something to live for. And Jim says, oh, that's what I was thinking. And she gives him a little kiss on the cheek. And I thought it was very cute. And Tatum is rolling her eyes.
I hate it so much.
Oh, I love it. I think they're so cute.
It is the most shoehorned bullshit aspect of this movie. I hate it so much. It makes no sense. It's so fast. It's just, I hate it. I hate it.
I love it. I mean, my interpretation is these two characters are just really young people who are just barely figuring themselves out and are suddenly thrust into this ridiculous situation. And they process it in very different ways. But then as they grow to trust each other, they kind of come to an understanding. And, you know, of course, when you're in an intense situation, that often develops feelings that you may not develop in other contexts.
I don't mind them developing feelings. I just feel like the way that the movie does it is just so fast. I feel like it goes from I will kill anybody and I will kill you to, oh wait, I'm kissing you on the cheek, to, oh wait a minute, let's make out. And I'm like, okay, we're taking huge jumps from one place to the next and we're not really seeing what's happening in between. So I feel like, I mean, granted, is this movie a love story? No, it's not. So it's like, how much do we actually expect them to really, you know, dive into developing this relationship, if you can even call it a relationship in that sense? But it just felt very rushed and very sudden to me. But that's just, I'm very critical in terms of how movies approach romance. So I'm aware that like what doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It doesn't seem rushed or sudden to me, but that's fine. That night, we find out that night that Selena qualified as a chemist. So
I thought that was cool.
That was very cool.
I thought that was really cool.
She has this whole store of Valium and other pills that she's been using to get to sleep. Jim has this dream where he wakes up and he's all alone. Everyone else has gone and abandoned him. And he immediately like freaks out and starts melting down and he's running around and he's yelling and everything. But then we see that actually it's a nightmare. And Frank, like Jim's kind of like stirring in his sleep and Frank comes over and like kind of comforts him and is like, hey, it's just a nightmare. And Jim goes, thanks, Dad. And I sob because because I think it's so sweet. And this sort of like, backstage theme of Jim kind of as this character who's kind of a homebody, you know, again, still lived with his parents, like kind of looking for a parental figure and then ending up as the parental figure is just an arc that I'm very invested in. And I think it's so sweet the way that Frank kind of immediately slides into the parent figure for these two young people that he's picked up.
I just think the one thing I'm going to say is I think this is something I would love to have a conversation with you about a little bit more off mic at some point. Maybe we've already talked about this. I don't know. But I'm just very interested in like the certain moments and themes that make you cry and the ones that make me cry, because you didn't cry at all in Pursuit of Happiness.
When I say I sob, I'm being facetious. I did not actually sob, to be clear.
Okay. Okay. But did you tear up though?
No. My heart melted a bit, but I didn't physically tear up.
Okay. I was like, I was like, you literally sobbed? Like, oh, that's so
sorry.
interesting. Like,
that was a joke.
Okay, gotcha. Because I was like, I would love to talk about, like, why do things like that make you sob? And then I'm just kind of like, yeah.
I started tracking some of the movies that do make me tear up with a tag on Letterboxd, and I'm actually kind of curious what was the most recent one to do it.
I mean, I know we both sobbed when we watched Coco, but I feel like aside from that, I don't really know other crying movies that we have in common. But anyway, that could be a tangent. You just made me think of that. But I know you weren't actually sobbing now. So, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. No, metaphorically sobbing, but
gotcha.
Not actually sobbing. Okay, so the next day, they keep driving. They arrive at Manchester, and there's this really amazing shot of them riding down this long, completely empty highway, and then the camera pans up and the entire city is on fire, which I'm assuming is kind of like they achieved with CGI or something like that, but it looks really impressive, I think.
Sorry, I'm just like, no, they actually burned an entire city to the ground.
Well, as opposed to like a matte painting or something.
Like, we built an entire fake city so we could burn it to the ground.
When now we're wondering why we're running out of money.
Indeed.
I don't understand. Help me budget this film. So they arrive at the special, like, this blockade where the radio voice was directing them, but there's no one there. Like, there's a bunch of military trucks and everything, but there's just a couple dead bodies, and otherwise it's empty. And Frank is like freaking out. He's like, no, they've got to be here. And he's like walking around and trying to look, and everyone else is like, oh, I don't know about this. What do we do now? But tragically, Frank happens to look up at just the wrong moment, and there's this corpse overhead, and a little drop of blood drops down and gets in his eye, and he turns into a zombie. And he's like trying to fight it off, and telling Hannah that he loves her, but also like pushing her away, and it's like pushing her away out of love, but also anger, and like, oh gosh, the way he like shakes his head and starts like jolting and everything, it's heartbreaking. Frank turns into a zombie, and then the soldiers finally swoop in and they shoot him dead, which, like, I'm always wondering, did they only just arrive, or were they just hiding out of sight?
I made a note of that
time?
as well.
Yeah.
I was like, quite the coincidence that they wait for him to get bit. And they've been here for quite a while at this point. Mm-hmm. But, you know, when we get to know what their motives are later on, maybe they were thinking, Jim's way too tiny. He doesn't pose a threat to us, so we'll let him live.
We'll try and let the bigger guy get himself killed before we intervene.
Right.
Yeah, maybe the first sign that something is off. So the soldiers all take the remaining survivors, so Jim, Selena, and Hannah, back to their stronghold, which is this old manor house that's been fortified. And we meet Christopher Eccleston, who plays Major West, and
who also stars in another fantastic post-apocalyptic story, which is the television show The Leftovers. If no one's seen it, highly recommend. It's a very different type of apocalypse, but yes, that's right. So, well, I was about to say, like, at first everything seems fine and then it goes downhill, but actually no, from the beginning everything is super off. Like, yeah. Jim, he's like taking a shower and he sees the soldiers like just playing with their taxi and like brutally poking fun at one of the other soldiers. It's just, everything's really tense, and you can tell that nothing is good, and you're just kind of waiting to see what is gonna, you know, when the other shoe is gonna drop. Like, I think Jim and Selena are desperately hoping that this will be fine, but it's very clearly not going to be fine. Let's see. So we discover, like, West is like showing Jim around the place, and he shows him that one of their own, like one of the soldiers, got infected, and they managed to chain him up in the backyard, which like is just such an incredibly cruel and like unbelievably horrifying thing. Like, this person that you've been serving alongside, who is presumably your friend,
you've chained him up like he's like this wild animal, and you're just performing basically experiments on him, like waiting to see how long it takes for him to die. And Jim is like clearly really disturbed and horrified, and like West is just like, oh yeah, you know, we're just waiting for him to die, and da-di-da, that's it. Let me show you the kitchen. And it's like really creepy.
I'm assuming that given what I know about like film productions, having worked on them, there probably was an intentional reason why they chose who they chose to be that person chained up back there. But
I was
like
thinking the same thing.
For me, coming from just who I am as a person, it really frustrates me that they chose a black person to be the one who's chained up.
Well, I think it's an 100% intentional choice on the part of the director and
I know.
casting.
It still bothers me though. Like, I'm not saying
it should.
I'm not saying it bothers me that they did it necessarily. It just bothers me to see like a person of color, particularly a black person, chained up like that. And I think like this movie is predominantly white people. It just is. And the fact that like one of the few people of color in this movie is someone who's chained and treated like an animal and having experiments performed on him, it really rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah. I mean, the way that the soldiers interact with Mailer, the soldier that was infected, and then also with Selena, like there's a lot of misogyny. Obviously, there's so much misogyny in the way that they treat the women, but there's also this tinge of like racialized violence as well. Like it's very much sort of this underlying threat and this underlying element in all of those scenes. Yeah.
I think it's interesting too though, because it has this dynamic of, yes, it's horrible to have a person who used to be, you know, as you said, a friend, someone you worked alongside, to have them chained up in the back like this. But at the same time, they are going to learn something important in terms of how long does it take for these things to starve to death, assuming that's even possible, you know? And I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my reading of the movie, especially in that last sequence, which I don't know if it existed in the original ending that, you know, Danny Boyle intended, but I think we do see the zombies at the end like very weak and sort of falling over, in this sense that maybe they do actually starve to death at some point, and there is hope that this could end. And so I think that introduces, I don't know, just it increases the complexity of having this person. It's like, yes, this is really, really, I don't know, sadistic and like sick that you are chaining someone, but at the same time, you are going to kind of get valuable information out of what you're doing. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's just an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like you could have gotten that information in less sadistic ways. Like that thought that eventually the zombies are going to starve to death is not a bad one, but I don't think you need to chain up this man who was supposedly under your authority, or, you know, your friend, in this incredibly dehumanizing way in order to gain that information.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying there is information that they are going to learn from this. It's not just like inherently destructive. Like there is logic behind why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, there's a twisted logic to what West is doing in general too. Like it's a horrible logic and it's bad and he should not do it. But so what we learn is that Jim, like West tells Jim, my men, like after a few weeks of living out here and thinking that we're basically the only people left on Earth, my men started to despair because they're thinking there's no future. And so he has this chilling line. He says, I promised them women. So basically they're luring survivors to them so that they can kill off or turn any men that they find, and then have the women there to be their sex slaves / like repopulate the earth. And it is so horrifying and disgusting. And like there is, you know, like I said, there's a twisted logic to it, in the sense that like yeah, we do need to be thinking about the future, but this is the horrifying inverse version, the horrified upside down version of looking toward the future, which is at any cost, we need to be enslaving people to our whims and treating people horribly in order to achieve some sort of twisted version of the future.
They should just go the 7 Brides for 7 Brothers route,
Go into town, kidnap a few women, bring them back. And
that movie's a horror movie, in my opinion. But
I love that movie, but I don't disagree.
It's a horror movie. Like, I'm sorry. People can love the movie, and I love that people love the movie. But I'm like, please acknowledge, this is a horror film.
There is
this movie's a prequel to 7 Brides for 7 Brothers.
Very much prequel, considering it's set like 200 years after 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. There's a bit of dissension in the ranks because there's this Sergeant Farrell who's like, his whole philosophy is basically mankind is just a blip in the grand scheme of like, the Earth being billions and billions of years old. So if humanity gets wiped out, then that's, in the grand scheme of things, that's just kind of a return to normalcy.
Let nature do what it's going to do.
Exactly. And then Wes' response to that is, in his own experience, people have always been killing people. So right now, we've got people killing people. So we're basically in a state of normality right now. And obviously that does not
Which I think is an interesting point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, it is very like, and this is kind of the classic horror, the classic post-apocalyptic, like what the appeal of that sort of genre is like all of our sort of societal, civilizational, the guardrails we've put up to keep ourselves in line, all of those things are stripped away. We're now seeing things as they truly are. We're seeing the way that all the bad ways that we treat each other are suddenly amplified because there's no rules or restrictions. And so it is this idea of an unveiling, of who humanity really is. And in this case, humanity is a bunch of bored guys who just want to like blow up other people and rape women. And it's very well done because you're just horrified and about to throw up. So yeah, any thoughts before we get to like Jim being taken out for execution and all the action sequence that ensues?
No, I mean, I feel like for the last part of this, I'm probably going to be quiet a lot because I think the last 30 minutes of this movie are incredibly weak. I think that they're predictable. I don't know. I've seen so many movies in this apocalyptic genre, and even what you're saying about this whole scenario being horrifying, it's not that it's not horrifying, but it doesn't hit me as horrifying because I've seen this so many times in so many other apocalyptic contexts of movies and TV shows that like the whole rest of this, none of it feels original to me. So yeah, I will let you take it from here because I don't like the ending to this movie at all.
All right. Well, everyone who agrees with Tatum can...
Which is no one. I fully acknowledge that no one agrees with me, but that...
There actually are... I did see a lot of critical reviews who have that. They're not as strident as you. I mean...
No one is on anything.
But, no, but I there are a lot of people who would agree that this movie is really good for 2/3, and then the last third is weak, or, the first third is really good, second third's okay, last third's weak, that sort of thing. Like, there's a lot of people out there who will agree that the third part is the weakest part of this movie.
Yeah, like I don't think it's bad. I just think that for me, there's just nothing, it doesn't have anything interesting to say because I've seen it before. So it's not like, oh, this is shot poorly, or because I think some of it does look really great, but it's not like, oh, it's shot poorly or the acting is bad, except for Hannah, who really gets a lot of lines in this last section.
Right.
I'm
well,
like,
I mean, we can just, yeah.
And she's also drugged, which makes it even worse. Yeah. So like, it's not that it's bad or that it's made poorly necessarily. It's just that for me, I'm just like, the story just falls apart. It just becomes predictable and unoriginal for me. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, feel free to interject if you do.
I will say,
yes,
the one thing I did like about this final sequence, I did really like that moment, which I'm trying to remember if I've seen it in another. I think they did this in The Last of Us, actually, which is a show that came out obviously like decades after this movie. But the mirror thing of like someone hiding behind a mirror and the zombie kind of looking at themselves, and that's kind of the way that you hide. I do like that. I do like that moment in this sequence.
Yeah, that was very cool. Although I was like, man, Hannah, her arm strength must be ridiculous.
No, I know, right?
I couldn't do that.
She's holding it really still too.
I know. Very impressive. But yeah, to sum up kind of where we were. So the soldiers' evil plans are revealed. Jim is taken Jim and Sergeant Farrell, who's kind of like decided to rebel against Major West. They're both taken out to the woods to be executed. But Jim manages to get away. So Sergeant Farrell kind of like, there's a little skirmish over whether he's going to get shot or stabbed. And then in that moment, he manages to hide among the corpses and then like make it back over the wall.
I did like that. Him hiding in the corpses. I thought that was really smart.
Yeah, that was really good.
I don't know how he climbed over that wall. Seems very tall with like barbed wire on top of it.
Literal barbed wire on top. Yeah, he should be a lot more covered.
He lost a shirt, but aside from that, he seems to be okay.
Yeah. Oh, I skipped over this one moment actually before all of that goes down, but I did want to mention while West is kind of revealing his evil plan to Jim, before he does that, he offers Jim a drink and he asks him who he's killed, and Jim admits that he killed a little boy. And it's this really interesting like moment of manipulation of, you know, get you to admit your darkest secrets so that you're in a vulnerable place when I reveal what I actually want you to do. But I thought that moment was really interesting because it is this moment of like, well, am I actually in such a different place than these people who are, you know, so gleefully blowing up corpses right and left, and are actually not corpses. These zombies are living people, like, lest we forget, you know, we do need to kill them in order to keep ourselves alive, but they're so callous and so like excited about the idea of like blowing up the zombies. It's very disturbing. But yeah, and I think Cillian Murphy is just, you know, he's still a very young actor here. It's still a bit rough in parts, but I think he's very good here.
How old is he here?
He's like mid-20s, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. So Jim taken outside to be shot, but he manages to escape. And then there's just like several things happening. Basically, all hell is breaking loose everywhere because Jim sets loose Mailer, the soldier that had been chained up in the backyard. Mailer then goes and like attacks some of the soldiers who are keeping Selena and Hannah hostage. And there's a great sequence where Hannah's like drugged out because Selena gave him some Valium, and she's like, I think they're all dead and you're gonna die too. And the soldier's like, stop it. He's like getting so freaked out, which is great. Yeah, so then Mailer breaks in. Selena and Hannah are like running around trying to escape. The soldiers are like basically getting picked off one by one and getting turned and then picking off each other in turn. Hannah and Selena get separated. So Selena's like taken by, I think his name is Mitch or Mitchell. He's like this particularly gross soldier into this room. And then Hannah is like kind of wandering around through the manor like la-di-da because she's very high. She finds this photo of her family, which is what she'd been looking for. And then a zombie comes in. She manages to hide behind a mirror and stay safe.
Where is Henry this whole time?
Oh, Major West?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So when Jim first breaks loose, what he does is he goes to the barricade and he sets off the alarm so that he lures out Major West and like another soldier or two to come and get him. And then at the barricade, he manages to murder the other soldier, and he disables the truck so that West then has to walk back. So there's a little while where like Jim is back at the manor and then Major West shows up.
How does Jim all of a sudden know how to do all of these things?
I have no idea.
Like, it's just like, okay, that's convenient. Cool. Didn't know you could do that.
It's his righteous
You're
rage
a very
that is fueling him.
For a bike courier, you really have a lot of interesting skills.
The creepiest part is when he murders the other soldier, but then he like sets him up in the truck as if he's driving the truck. Like, it's very serial killer style. It's like, whoa. I'm very glad that Jim's on the side of good, because what could happen if he was not? So yeah, Jim has a gun now. He like runs back to the manor. He's like looking around.
A gun with a knife on the front of it.
Oh yeah, the bayonet. He like fully stabs Jones, who's the cook, like right in the chest. Everyone's kind of running around. There's just all these little moments where like the soldiers are getting attacked and are like pleading for their mothers, and West arrives and like he finds Jones, who's been stabbed and is bleeding out, and he holds his hand while he dies and is like shh, and it's, you know, a little like moment of complexity where it's like there is this genuine care he has for his men in the midst of all the psychopathic, you know, dispassion.
Can I just say I find it unrealistic that all of these men have been murdered and turned into zombies. I don't know how many it would be at this point. 7, 8, I don't know. But Jim is running around screaming, Selena, Hannah, for like a very long time. And the zombies do not find him. I'm like, I don't believe that for a second.
Well, he does it briefly, and then he kind of like, he like heads outside and sort of makes it over the roof and like drops
and then he's
right
in
at
an
the spot
attic, and then they're like, oh my gosh, is he above us? And then he drops
Yes,
down
where
like
is he?
Spider-Man. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's very like all of a
Okay.
sudden he's the horror movie monster who's stalking the bad guys.
We have that like and this comes like quite a bit before this, but when it starts raining, we have that like Sin City shot of Jim standing in the rain, and it's like, whoa, the raindrops look like they're white snow and it's black, and I'm like, okay, now we're in Sin City. Cool, got it.
I mean, we knew that already, but so Jim makes it into the room where Selena's being held, and he just absolutely obliterates this soldier. He like drops down in back of him, like fully beats his head against the wall, puts out his eyes with his fingers, which is like, it's a pretty great, like whatever that prosthetic that they used, it looks very convincing. The whole music, by the way, during this house sequence, I think it's called In the House in a Heartbeat. I love it. It's so good. I love the music in this movie so much. Jim is like, he's absolutely covered in blood and he's in shadow, and Selena like fully thinks that he's turned infected, which is very reasonable to think. But Jim like heads toward her and she like almost swings and then she doesn't, and then he's like, that was longer than a heartbeat, and oh, he's fine, he's not
And now
infected.
they're making out.
And then
Which,
they're making
like,
out. And then Hannah breaks a vase over his head and she's like, I thought he was biting you.
Can I just say
I love that so much.
considering the fact that this home is full of zombies and they have yet to find Hannah, she could very well be being raped right now for all that they know. And they make out for like 30 seconds? I'm like, guys.
Oh, come on.
There are bigger priorities here. Like,
Come on. They're relieved to see each other.
Hannah's in danger. What are you doing?
Hannah's fine.
You don't know that. She could be eaten by zombies right now. And you guys are like, no, give us like a solid like 30 seconds to a minute to just make out with each other.
Oh my gosh,
like,
it's not 30 seconds.
it's a long time. It probably is 30 seconds.
But
anyway.
yeah, like I said, they're like making out, and then Hannah breaks a vase over his head and she's like, I thought he was biting you. And Jim's like, I was kissing her. Wait, are you stoned?
Are you high?
It's so funny.
He's very good at identifying stoned people. He clocks it within like 3 seconds. Like, dude,
yeah.
how many stoned people have you been around?
So they all head out, but West is waiting in their car and he shoots Jim in the stomach, like basically out of revenge for, you messed up my military fortification. Hannah like does not hesitate. She gets behind the wheel and she backs the taxi with West in the back up to the house, the zombies like pull him out the back window and murder him. And then she's like, all right, guys, let's go. Which like stoned Hannah is way more useful to the group than regular Hannah. They like drive through the gate, and this is like the one thing in this movie, apart from the acting of Hannah, that is truly, I think, terrible, which is this really goofy freeze frame as they go through the gate.
It's so bad.
I don't know why it's there.
It's very bad.
It looks bad. But yeah, then we cut to 28 days later, and all of a sudden the cinematography is very different. It's a lot brighter. I think it's a similar camera, but it does look a bit clearer. We have come full circle. Jim is waking up once again in naked in a bed, but this time it is with like in a place where he's surrounded by the people he loves. So Hannah's there, Selena's there, and they've been working on creating this giant like stitching together these blankets basically so they can form a signal to any overhead planes. And something I hadn't mentioned earlier is that when he'd escaped from the soldiers and he's lying on the ground, he sees a plane overhead, and that kind of gives him the motivation to get up and keep going and go rescue Hannah and Selena. It's because it is this indication that there is something going on outside of Britain, that there are, communities of people out there who have not been infected. So they're up in the in the middle of the countryside just waiting to be rescued, and there's this plane that's flying overhead. I think I saw somewhere that the plane that they is supposed to be like from Norway or Finland or something like that.
It's like a fighter jet.
Yeah, it's like a fighter jet
or something like that.
Yeah, like looking for survivors, and then once they find them, they'll call in a helicopter. But yeah, so the plane buzzes them. The message they write is hello, which is, kind of has thematic resonance throughout the movie because that's the phrase that Jim always uses. But yeah, the movie ends on a hopeful note, which I really like, although I can see Tatum does not. But like I said, this movie, I don't know, the sort of mix of optimism and pessimism really works for me. I am fundamentally an optimistic person when it comes to movies, but I do also like some darkness, so I don't know. It works for me. I understand it may not work for others.
Yeah, does not work for me at all. He should have died.
Should have died.
No, seriously. I think you said in your kind of research or whatever, like the original ending was him dying and then Selena and Hannah going off and figuring things out. That's how it should have ended. And also, I'm not anti-happy endings. I mean, with this movie, I kind of am. I don't think it should have a happy ending, but the way that they do it is so extreme. It's like the colors are bright and everything is green and they're like giddy with joy and just like jumping up and down like, oh, we're so happy. And I'm like, this is a bit much. Like, y'all could just... And also, it's got like this weird nod to the audience of like, hey, remember how we said hello a lot? Huh? And I'm like, okay, like funny joke, I guess. But like, what is the tone of this? Like, this whole movie is one tone and then we're ending it on a completely different tone.
It's not that different from the tone of the rest of the movie, because you have sequences like the grocery store sequence or the picnic sequence where there are these moments of joy and levity. It's just that they're brief, and now we're finally coming to a part where all the darkness and all the bleakness has, it happened and it was horrible, and now they're coming to a point of, hope for a better future. So I don't think it's necessarily out of tone with the rest of the movie.
I think the way that it looks visually makes it feel more out of tone. Because like even in the grocery store and things like that, it still had that grainy, grungy, dark sort of feel. Whereas this is a lot more clear, smooth, bright greens. The sun is shining. It's like, are we in heaven? Like, okay.
Well, they've had a chance to breathe. They've had a chance to kind of get away and reform and regroup. I think they're in a better place emotionally than they were during the rest of the movie. So it makes sense that it would be filmed a little bit differently.
I disagree, but that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very extreme the way that it's shot, in my opinion. It's like, we're happy now. And I'm like, okay, thanks. In case you didn't know, you're really letting us know.
All right, so this movie was, like I said, it was an unexpected box office hit. Particularly popular in the U.S., which wasn't expected since this is a small British movie. But it cost about £5 million to make, and the worldwide take was about almost $86 million. It wasn't nominated for any Oscars, although it did win some awards, including Best Horror Film at the Saturn Awards. In terms of critical response, so Metacritic currently has it at 73. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 87%. And then I pulled two reviews. Neither of these are from like major publications, but the first one I think just sums up some things about what I like about it. And then
is that a website? What? Bloody Disgusting?
Yeah, it's like a Bloody Disgusting is like a film blog that specializes in horror. I believe. So what they said, this is like it's from some article that's like, the 20 best horror films of the 21st century or something like that. But what they said about it is zombie movie, political allegory, humanist drama. 28 Days Later is all of these things and more. A genuine work of art by a director at the top of his game. What's so amazing about the film is the way it so expertly balances scenes of white-knuckled, hell-for-leather horror with moments of intimate beauty. So I like that. And then there's this Letterboxd review that I found like a year or so ago, and something about the way that he phrases it, I just can't stop thinking about, because, when I first saw this, I was a little thrown off by that choice to have that like really ugly looking videotapey cinematography. I'm like, why? I feel like I can't see anything. Like, why did they do this? But I really love the way he phrases it here. So this is a writer named Branson Reese in his Letterboxd review. He says, I remembered the sequence with Cillian Murphy walking around in abandoned London to Godspeed You, Black Emperor being really cool, and on rewatch I think cool was probably underselling it. It feels like a miracle. Knowing that they couldn't afford to close down London and had to just shoot early in the morning before people were out only makes it more tense. Every shot feels impossible. They did that and only caught this on home movie-ass camera? I'll take all sorts of boring third-act army stuff, and maybe they should have done this as a silent film dialogue in the world if you put that London sequence in your movie. I don't think any other horror movie I'm aware of captured the specific visual dread and agony of 9/11 like Boyle did. Something is incredibly wrong, and we didn't have time to film it better.
Can I just say that as someone who has worked many times as a set dresser, it's really stressful to think about having to dress an entire city in the morning and shoot it and then reset it, do all
in
of that
20 minutes
in a few hours. That's insane. Anyway.
Yeah, much respect to the crew that worked on that sequence.
Wonder how many people they had to hire for that day to make sure they could get it done on time.
Yeah, so in terms of wrapping up final thoughts on this movie, despite Tatum's thoughts, I continue to love this movie.
I'm glad you do. I wasn't trying to sway you. I don't want to shit on a movie that you like. If you like it, that's awesome. I'm so glad that you like it.
Yeah, I really love the relationships in this movie. I think it does such a good job of bringing out sort of a very darkly pessimistic and honestly realistic view of the world and what humanity is capable of, but also balancing it with this depiction of humanity at its best, and about, how we are, we need relationships, we need each other. And in situations like this, those are the things that are going to keep us going. Those are the things that are going to keep us safe and sane. And this idea of safety, but also just sanity and growth being found through coming to care for other people and to protect them, I think is just very beautiful. And then also I think there are just a lot of things that this movie says about about toxic masculinity, about the violence of the world, about the ways that we, the way that rage operates in our culture, and kind of commenting on the hatred and polarization and the many tensions that are existing, this feeling of loneliness and disenfranchisement, like a lot of things that we didn't really have time to get to. But I think this movie has a lot of things to say about it, and it's just, I think, very well made. It's very engaging to me. I think it's very well paced, and yeah, there's a reason that it was so influential for the time and has kind of persisted as a classic of the genre. So yeah, is there anything, I know there are many things that you did not like about this movie. Is there anything like positive on this rewatch that you will take away?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm sorry that we weren't able to touch on those other things that you said you wanted to discuss. Maybe we can do like a bonus episode or something for our Patreon supporters that we don't have, because we don't do Patreon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about that off mic at any point, let me know. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about those things. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, this movie's not for me. But I do wish that, not wish necessarily, but I do acknowledge that if I had seen this movie in the time that it came out without having seen the dozens and dozens of apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic material that has come out in the decades since, I would appreciate this movie a lot more. But that being said, I do still really like that opening sequence with the monkeys. I think it's just really, really well done, and just so good at establishing the stakes right off the bat and building this tension. And yeah, I think that this movie opens very strong. It doesn't carry through till the end, but in my opinion. But yeah, I like that first opening scene a lot. So yeah.
All right. Tatum, do you want to tell the lovely listeners what we're going to be covering in the next episode?
Yeah. So this week, Geneva chose a movie that she loved that I'm not necessarily a fan of. This might happen again next week. I hope.
I mean, that happened last week as well.
True.
Lest we forget.
But I don't think, was it that you didn't like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or was it just that it was
made
too
me
much?
Physically ill.
Yeah, I don't think it was like you didn't like Texas Chainsaw.
It's not that I thought it was a bad movie. It's that I thought the movie should not exist.
Gotcha. But anyway, so yeah, next week we are talking about one of my favorite sports movies of all time, because it happens to be centered around the sport that I played through college, which is ice hockey. So we will be watching talking about the movie Miracle next week from 2004. It's a very inspiring film about the American men's hockey team playing against Russia for the championship of the world. Not really of the world, but yeah, playing for the championship, and that happening during a time where there were a lot of political things at stake. And yeah, it's a very inspiring movie, and it's one of my favorite sports films. So if Geneva doesn't like this movie, then I'm going to take a break from sports movies for a while, because it might just be time to take a break.
I will preview one thing about our episode next week, is that, Tatum, I actually have seen this movie before, and I remember basically nothing about it. Okay. But I don't remember disliking it.
Okay. I don't know what to do with that. I think that's a good clean palette to start with. Yeah. I don't think you'll connect with it, but who knows? So we'll see. But either way, I want to talk about it. So
yeah. There's always stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to this, guys, and happy spooky season. Lest we didn't mention this at the top of the episode, but of course this is dropping on Halloween.
Oh, so, is it?
It is. Yes.
I didn't even know that. Happy
enjoy
Halloween.
Enjoy your trick or treating. Stay safe. Try not to run into any zombies.
Yeah. Or if you do, just have a baseball bat on you and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Or a machete. or a bayonet.
That part where he oversleeps and she's like, "Come on, Babe Ruth." Very cute. But also, like, I would go for the machete. I don't know how much a baseball bat is going to do.
Anyway.
Thanks, everybody.
Talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at yourpicpod@gmail.com. Our theme song is composed by Joel Rushton, and our podcast graphic was designed by Kara Shin. If you like this show and want to hear more, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're excited to have you on this journey with us. Until next time.